housekeeping slides. I'll try and make these brief. And whoops, got to get my mouse working here. And so here at EAN, you can study with us through our free weekly audio podcast that we put up. You can subscribe to any area of our Astro Library and, of course, our multimedia course in 3 segments. Here's a little information on the Astro Library. We've taken a dozen years worth of material and divided it up by the subject matters. You see sections 1, 2, and 3. And you can subscribe 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or do a monthly reoccurring that you can transfer at any time. You can also subscribe to all 3 sections that same way. And if you go to our website, we have over the course of the winter, Leroy reviewed each section and went through and listed the author and the title and whether it's audio, video, etc. You can look at that information on our website before you subscribe to any of these sections.
Kim, that's a real good point. Yes. Because I actually want to clarify that a little bit. I went through all 3. I actually have not put up the section 3 PDF yet, but the first 2, planets, houses, and signs, and of course understanding EA, there's a completed list with the new number of hours of audio and video. Like Kim said, the authors are listed there with each of the titles, so you can kind of peruse what kind of information you're going to get before you purchase. And that will be completed this week as well, because I'm putting in a lot of new forecasting material, some of these current webinars in section 3, and I just got kind of waylaid with the trip, etc. But that will be up shortly on section 3. So just go to that Astro Library page on the website, and you can get a current list by the end of the week of all 3 sections.
Thank you. And thank you, students, for being patient with me in acknowledging Leroy. He does so much work behind the scenes that you never see. You know, you hear my voice, you see my face a lot of the times, but I just acknowledge Leroy for everything he does in making the website and all of this material so easily accessible. And I'm sure I'm saying thank you on behalf of many, many souls who study with us. So thanks, Leroy. And of course, our multimedia course, we have also segment 2 that we do offer the monthly classes just like these, and we have segment 3, health and wellness. And if you are a student of any one of these segments, you can purchase the other 2 with a $50 off coupon code. You enter the word secret upon checkout. And then, listing of our future classes. One of the things you notice is I didn't have a class in January. I had the busiest January I've had as astrologer, and I don't know how long. And I finally just had to surrender to Saturnian space-time. And so I decided to just come up with a standalone class for today and shift my classes in working Pluto through the houses to kind of match up with the solar system. And so you can see here that for the Pluto in the 1st, 3rd, and 4th houses, I have volunteers still looking for somebody who has natal Pluto in the 2nd to volunteer your class. You do not have to attend live because I hold these classes during the day. What you do if you want to volunteer your chart and you cannot be on the class, I'll have a series of environmental questions that you'll answer so that we can use that information with some of our chart interpretation as we look at it. So this is the switch up in the class schedule this year. And so here again, our subject today is on chart rectification. And I'm going to put out a disclosure here. I'm not an expert on chart rectification. What I'm going to work with today is just really showing you what I do when I have clients come to me and they don't know their birth data. And it just so happens that both of these charts that I'm going to show you today are clients that I will have at the end of the week. And so I don't have all the environmental conditioning. We're going to be really focusing on a lot of the math over the interpretation, although I will share some of my thoughts in interpreting the charts as well for you. And so basically what we're working with is when we have missing birth data. And many times when people come to you, they'll know their birth date. Very rarely have I ran into anybody who doesn't know, an actual birth date. Usually that's adoptees, and that tends to not be the case anymore today. Any of our young adoptees, they tend to have an actual birth certificate, even with birth time on it. But if the birth date, say the year, is unknown, basically there's too much that changes from year to year. They're born January 15th, but we don't know whether it's 1952 or 1953. There's too much information that changes to be able to cast the chart. And it's a rare phenomenon to have them come to you. I've had it happen a couple of times, and I really don't remember what I've told them. But we have worked, I basically just given them probably both charts, 12 noon if they didn't know a birth time, and said, just play with this as you study astrology and see what fits for you. When the birthplace is unknown, and typically that's not the case either, almost everybody knows the city, state, or city, country where they were born. If they don't know that, but you still have a birth year, you can cast the chart and you just put it close to a place where they were born. Where I'll commonly use this is if I'm working with relationship astrology and somebody wants synastry and composite charts, and so-and-so's from, down south in the Savannah, Georgia area. I don't know the exact little town, but I know that's where he was born, that's where he was raised, and here's his birth date. I can cast the chart that way and work with some synastry and composite information there. So again, typically it's the birth time that's unknown, not the date or place. And you will find it a lot more common to have somebody come to you and have the birth date, have the birthplace, they don't know the time. And we're going to look at it two different ways today. When it's absolutely unknown, no idea. And then the second example is when they've narrowed down a time period, and we're going to play with that to try and help them come up with a chart for themselves. Again, when the birth time is absolutely unknown, I'm going to show you what I do. And if I work with that client multiple times, I have a third case. I'm just remembering that. I have a third case who's coming to me in which I've looked at their chart off and on over the years. And um, it's something that takes a bit of time if you're really going to get into rectification. To be quite honest, over my 30 years as an astrologer, whenever I run into a psychic that I really trust, I will utilize them and refer clients to them and have them look for a birth time. That is how we found the time for my mother's chart, who was born in 1938. We've been using that forever. I have 3 psychics over the years that I've used, and all 3 have now deceased and moved over to spirit world again. I don't currently have anybody that I'm working with. If somebody's listening to class and they have a psychic that they have utilized and would care to share it with me or post it on the Segment 1 Facebook group, by all means, please, you're welcome to do so. I have used that and been very comfortable with that, because then I can take my astrological detective hat and start working with the time forwards, backwards a little bit. And again, as I said, in the case of my mother, the psychic was also a very close friend, and we've used it for years and it works. So that is obviously, an alternative method. If the time is unknown for me and it becomes a repeat client, we play with it over time. Now, I'll have more to say on this a little bit later. But when you don't have a known birth time, you cast the chart with the birth date in place. And what I'll do is I'll use 12 p.m. noon for the time. And I'll use 0 degrees Aries house system. I'll show you this in a minute, because it gives me a baseline or a foundation that I can start looking at the chart, and everything that I'm looking at is pretty accurate. I'm not swinging it around trying to guess one of the 12 Pluto houses. And evolutionary astrologers, there is a method that we can utilize for trying to find that Pluto house when the time is unknown. I'll speak a little bit to that later on here. But when we use 12 p.m. noon, and especially when we use 0 degrees Aries houses, we're not paying any attention to the horizontal or vertical axes, meaning the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, nadir. We're not paying attention to those. We're not paying attention to any of the planetary house cusps. So let me show you an example. Whoops, first of all, more information. I have some examples here. Um, Again, we just are ignoring the houses when we don't have any idea what the birth time is. And you still get a lot of information, and there's still a lot you can share with a client when that birth time is unknown. Obviously, we won't be able to do a complete chart analysis because the houses and the 4 angles are unknown. The other 2 variables that we have when the birth time is completely unknown is the fact that the moon varies. It moves between 13 to 15 degrees in 24 hours. So the moon will be variable. And as I'll show you, when we put the moon at 12 noon, you can take the greater amount, 15 degrees, divided by 2. You can subtract 8 degrees. You can add 8 degrees to whatever the moon is at 12 noon, and that's going to show you, does the moon change signs in that 24-hour period? Does it vary in any aspects it makes? If it does change signs, typically through observation correlation, asking your clients questions around emotional security, the early nurturing environment, you can almost always correlate it to one of 2 signs if the moon does change signs. And that right there starts to give you some clues then as you're starting to work with time in doing any rectification. Now, Mercury can vary between 0 to 2 degrees when it is turning stationary retrograde or stationary direct. It can move, it's almost standing still, excuse me. When it is full speed ahead, it can go as fast as 2 degrees a day. And so you want to just kind of do an observation here, and I'll show you an example of whether it is retrograde or not. And if it's direct, is it an interior conjunction? Or excuse me, if it's direct, it's going to be an exterior conjunction visually in the sky, but it's going to be moving forward, and when it goes over that sun, moving forward direct, it's going to be so fast that then you can play with that 2-degree orb. Otherwise, Mercury's going to be 0 to 1 degrees. Any other planet that you draw up is going to be within a 1-degree orb, or 10 minutes of orb when you're working with the outer planets that barely move. So with the exception of the moon, almost every planet in the chart is going to be accurate, and the aspects between the planets will be within orb and accurate to look at. So now I think I actually have chart example, but before I go in, is there any questions from anybody before I move forward? In a nutshell, this is what I draw up when somebody's birth time is completely unknown. I tell them, I can draw a chart up. I won't be able to be as accurate as I would if you had an actual birth time, but I can draw up a beginning chart that gives us a starting point, and we can explore with that during your session. And I've had clients come to me for years in this case. One of the 2 clients that's coming today, it's a gift from the girlfriend for Christmas. And he's curious. He wants to know, but he's looked and looked and looked, and he just has no idea what time he's been born. No parents, no baby book. He's exhausted his resources. And by the way, if somebody doesn't know the time, here's another tidbit for you. You can also direct them to get a copy of their birth certificate. And I know this works for the United States. This may not be always accurate on an international level, but if you're, for instance, in the United States, since 9/11, and we have passed all these security laws, it's very easy now to get a copy of your birth certificate from Department of Vital Statistics or Department of Health. That stuff has all been organized on a statewide level for all 50 states in the U.S. And if that birth time is there, it'll come through on that birth certificate. The other client that I have, again, I'll show you as an example, it wasn't on her birth certificate. And yet her mother could narrow it down to within a 90-minute time period. And so this is what I will explore later on this week with the second client, where we've got a window of time. We'll work again with both these examples. But first of all, before I move on, questions from anybody? If not, we'll go to charts.
Pretty quiet on the board.
All right, thank you all very much for allowing me to swallow water. When I monologue like this for 2 hours, I find I go through a bit of water, so thank you. All right, so here is the chart for the male that the girlfriend gave him a Christmas present. And as you can see up here, if you're looking at the data, we're working with August 30th, 1957. We know where he was born, city and state, Watertown, South Dakota. And so again, I've cast the chart. You're looking here in the upper left of the slide at 12 p.m. noon. And you can see here that I'm using 0-degree Aries as the houses. And what this means is the ascendant is literally 0 Aries 0 0. And what it does is we're putting all the signs around the chart in the natural zodiac. Second house, 0 Taurus. Third house, 0 degrees Aries. When you start to look at a chart from this perspective, how it will help you from an interpretation viewpoint is the planet, or point in the case of the nodes, the planet will show up in the same house as it naturally correlates to with the sign. Leo planets in the 5th house, Virgo planets in the 6th, Libra planets in the 7th. Now, especially as you're, moving through learning to be a practicing astrologer, and again, you don't have to be to take these classes. This just can be for your own personal knowledge. It's what I did for years when I started out in astrology. But when you're looking at it from this perspective, you don't have any confusion or error of putting, for instance, Pluto in the 3rd house when you don't have any idea if that's where it belongs. Or putting Pluto over in the 11th house if you don't have any idea where it belongs. This is what we call the natural zodiac, 0-degree Aries house system. And as you can see, even without a birth time here, but having a birth date and place, we've still been able to cast a chart. And we'll know the Pluto generation. We'll know that Pluto is conjunct Sun, conjunct Mars. We'll know that Mercury is, look at this one right here. Here's what I wanted to show you. Mercury's retrograde. And so Mercury's going to be fairly accurate to within a half a degree to a degree, because it is what? 24 minus 7 is 17 degrees. That Mercury is ahead of the Sun, and it's going to go retrograde right about there, anywhere between 21 to 24 degrees, I think it is, that Mercury can get ahead of the Sun. So we know that this is going to be moving pretty slowly because of this retrograde, and it's just started to reverse to an interior conjunction. So we can pretty much recognize that Mercury is accurate. The variable is going to be the moon here. And as I put over here for you, the moon varies, it travels between 13 to 15 degrees in any 24-hour period. I always just lengthen it out to 15, 16 degrees to make my math easy. And whatever the moon shows up with at 12 p.m., I know that I can subtract half of that, 15, even it up to 16, divided by 2, 8. 19 minus 8 degrees gives me 11. And I know I can take 19 degrees and add 8 degrees, which is going to bring us to 27. So without a time, we know that the moon on this birth date up here could be anywhere between 11 and 27 degrees. It does not change signs. It stays within Scorpio. We know that if it's anywhere between midnight to 12 p.m., the moon's going to travel then between 11 degrees and 19. Look at that. Moon has a conjunction to the North Node. This will start to be some of the questions that I start to ask this client. Just having a moon in Scorpio and conjunct the North Node of the moon in Scorpio, I'm going to be asking this client relationship questions. Have there been any triangles? I obviously have a little bit of information in making the appointment. The fact that he is in a new relationship and it is a gift from the new girlfriend. So we don't know the history, and obviously we've got someone who is 57 going on 58 years old here, so there could be a lot of relationship history, and the more intense the story might get, the more I might figure that moon was a little earlier, closer conjunction, which will then start to give me clues that perhaps the time period is between 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. As we know in evolutionary astrology, when you have all of the birth data, you're still asking the questions, all of the environmental conditioning questions that you have seen me put out in various classes. If it is your choice or interest as an astrologer to give those environmental questions out before the appointment, have the client type it out, write it out to you, email it to you, you can definitely do that. You can get that type of information ahead of time. I typically don't. I don't have the time for that. I'm just a little too busy. And so I ask that information on the first 5 to 10 minutes of any session with a client. And I've already got my detective hat on. I've already got my intuitive psychic hat on, and I am discerning, intuiting all the time that I am talking to them. Now, in a case such as this, where the birth time is unknown, I will spend the entire session, something that hit me on an intuitive level as we're going back and forth with information and sharing and questions and feedback. I'll be taking notes and I'll be paying attention to any intuitive hits that I might get. For example, if this gentleman comes to me and says, I've had a series of monogamous relationships and they never last more than 2 years. I just get bored with them, or they start getting really critical of me. I might say, ooh, is this a first house Pluto? Not able to sustain long-term relationships. Very critical perhaps of himself, and therefore it gets reflected through the partner, 7th house in Pisces, projecting Piscean onto the partner and then having that come back to him as well. It might put that Scorpio moon down here in the 3rd, and he might give me feedback. I just got tired of partners lying to me. That right there is strong clues that, ooh, I might play with the time and play with the first house Pluto. I don't know if that's what he's going to show up and say this week, but you get my point. And what I will do as we go through natal Pluto through all 12 houses over the next 12 months, when we're working with Pluto in the first house, I will give you, here's the questions you ask to see, or here's the clues that you're looking for to see if this could possibly be a first house Pluto coming to you, regardless of the Pluto generation they're born in. We'll do it with the 2nd house, 3rd house. We'll work with that over the course of this year. And so then As I am looking at this chart, as you can see, Mars is new phase Pluto here. This is a soul that's just going to be initiating the Pluto house lessons wherever it might be. But even without knowing the Pluto house, we have a Pluto in Virgo. We can talk a lot about the soul generation that he was born into. It's also his personality, his sun sign that you see going on here. And with Mars' new phase to this, there's a lot we can talk about with this soul about all of the Pluto Virgo archetypes, the self-love versus self-criticism, learning how to see his cup half full versus half empty. How much does he procrastinate? Pluto, as you can see here, is 0 degrees Virgo. And as we have spoken throughout EA, when you're looking at any sign and a planet in the sign, and you look at that 30 degrees from 0 to 30, you can stretch that out to almost a 360-degree dial. If a planet is at 0, 1, 2 degrees of a sign, they are just coming here on a soul level to learn that generational lesson. If this person had a chart and where Pluto was sitting over here at 27, 28 degrees Virgo, we would know that he's had more than one Pluto Virgo generation and he's finishing things up 27, 28, 29, 30 degrees Virgo. That's a generic thing you can know about any of the Pluto generations. What degree on the 30-degree dial of any sign do you see that Pluto? Now, we also have 4 planets in Virgo, so we know that there's a lot we can be working with in that regard. And with Mercury retrograde here in Virgo, Mercury retrograde is pointing to Pisces, and Mercury retrograde in Virgo is retrograde, and Virgo is a double signature to just throw off all that left brain confusion and over analyzing and one more fact, one more detail, and to really be focusing on starting to trust the intuition. There's a lot you can speak about to that in regards as well. And so as you can start to see here, just using a chart with the natural zodiac, there's a lot of information we can be looking at. And as a matter of fact, you can also do the planetary grid in this fashion as well. And as you can see, what we're starting to look at here is Uranus is square the nodes. We don't know the houses, but there's still a lot of information. Uranus in Leo, there's all the deconditioning around self-love. There's the liberation to actually be who they are. Leo, opposite sign of what Uranus rules, Aquarius. And so there's a lot here about creative self-actualization that this soul has to break free and learn how to do. Now that square the nodes, you know that the nodes move in a retrograde fashion. So to find the resolution node, we start with Uranus at 9 Leo, and we reverse through the zodiac. We go clockwise till we get to this node here. The south node is the resolution node. It's 1253. It's 13 Taurus. So the nodes are applying squares to Uranus. And when it is applying squares in regards to a planet square the nodes, or any square, if it's applying square, regardless of first quarter, last quarter, disseminating or crescent, the pressure and intensity to address that energy is increasing because it's applying, to be exact. So the nodes are applying squares to Uranus, and the skip steps are going to increase this lifetime if he is not willing to address where he needs to learn how to self-love, where he needs how to learn how to acknowledge his own sense of self, his own creativity, to be different, to learn new ways, to liberate how he gives and receives in love. All of the Uranus and Leo generational, mini generation things will start to come through here. And if we ask him questions, this is another clue when you don't have a birth time. If there are planets square the nodes, and you see we have Chiron square the nodes as well, if there are planets square the nodes, we know that that planet that's square the nodes will represent the skip steps where that soul is stuck in really moving forward. And so we can start to ask questions around that. And Uranian questions can be, are you a loner? Do you follow the crowd? Are you an inventor? Are you an innovator? Where are you? You know, you ask Uranian questions and then you start to ask the nodal questions. And when you're working with Taurus and Scorpio, it's going to be around self-reliance and commitment. And you see the moon in Scorpio right here that is about just 10 degrees past the first quarter square. It's first quarter phase to Uranus. So we know that there could be some emotional trauma here, emotional rugs pulled out underneath his feet, and because it makes this first quarter phase back to Uranus, you know, we can start asking questions around this. Have you had love affairs on the partner? Has the partners had love affairs on you? Have you been addressing that as deeper and deeper need for self-love whenever a relationship goes belly up? Again, it would start to flow. This is how I will work with it with this client. I'll just ebb and flow depending upon the questions that they ask. And I'll be able to tell him, even without knowing the houses, with this Uranus square the nodes and the resolution node, south node, I'll be able to counsel that your soul has lessons to learn in really deepening an essence of self-reliance within yourself and being able to take care of all your own needs so that you lessen codependency on emotional levels with a partner. You can see Neptune over here at 0 degrees Scorpio. So that can start to blend into this picture as well. Not seeing your partners as they essentially are, wanting to sometimes project your emotional vulnerability or needs onto them, and then feeling very disappointed when those needs do not get met. So is this helping with everybody? In essence, what I'm bringing up here is to show you an example when birth time is completely unknown, using 0 degree Aries houses and how you can still read a chart. And I'm just touching upon a few things in regards to the time that we have. With Chiron over here, and again, we have many who came through the 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, that had Chiron-Uranus oppositions. And with this Uranus in Leo generation, Chiron usually was in Aquarius. And here's Chiron square the nodes as well. Chiron at 13, going clockwise through the zodiac. We find the node at 12. The nodes are 1 degree past exact square to Chiron. So the Chiron square of the nodes is a little less intense than Uranus. The nodes are applying squares to Uranus. They're separating squares with Chiron. But Chiron's over here in Aquarius, and so here's the woundedness. One of the things that we could ask this soul is, where do you feel that some of your deepest hurts are in this lifetime? Reflect through your familial environment, your teenage years, relationships, work, your children. You know, where's some of your deepest wounding that you have? And then that could give us some clues perhaps to a house placement with Chiron. And with the Chiron wound here, and again, Aquarius is an archetype of past life trauma. So you have a double signature, and Chiron could be just frozen in these past life traumas. The Chiron in Uranus mini generation, this is what you could see here is with Aquarius being fixed air, is they repeat the trauma and they repeat the trauma, and that trauma happens multiple times throughout the lifetime. And it would depend upon some of their answers on how it works through. Obviously, they could give an answer, my partner always leaves me. And I just decided I don't trust relationships. I haven't been in a relationship for quite a while. This is a big leap for me with this new relationship. And then we could, depending on the various answers, if they say that I have a previous relationship and my partner took the children and I haven't seen them for 10 years. Might be a sixth house Pluto. These might be in the correct houses. We might still have we might flip the chart around, and that Uranus or that Chiron might be right here. Both these signatures could be a partner taking the children away. Again, various answers, stay tuned. Maybe I'll give you some tidbits next month as I come up with some options of what I think in working with this client. I think you're getting the picture of what I'm trying to say here in regards to the validity of using a 0-degree Aries chart with a client and the information you can still bring through. Now, you can use forecasting with this method as well. You can use your transits, your secondary or major progressions, and you can use solar arcs. And I'll show you examples of how you do this. The exceptions in forecasting is the moon is going to vary too much to really be accurate with progressions and solar arcs. So I will ignore progressed moon and solar arc moon. But I'll work with progressions and solar arcs and transits with all the rest of the planets. The other thing that you want to really be careful for is most software programs will move the progressed and solar arc nodes counterclockwise, and they move clockwise. And so if you really want to work with progressed and solar arc nodes, which are valuable and important in evolutionary astrology, you may have to correct that nodal axis movement by hand using an ephemeris. And just to review, it's a day for a year with secondary or major progressions. This is just two different words for the same thing, a day for a year. And you use a degree for a year in solar arcs. All right. And so solar arcs is not really used with an ephemeris. You just need to know the number of years biologically. And in this person's case, it's, 57 years old. You would move that nodal axis back 57 degrees. You would use the ephemeris for the progressions. And so let me show you this via the three methods, and I separated them just to make it a little bit easier for you. Here's the transits for this person today. And so you can see here that we have quite a bit of activity that's still going on with the chart. Perhaps the biggest one is the fact that he's getting ready to have his second Saturn return here. Look at all the information you can speak to in regards to this, regardless of the, again, houses that we're using. Look at all the Piscean planets going on right here that are opposite this. If I'm working with the transits, I'd probably start with Pluto and see what aspects that makes to the chart. And then you can see here Pluto is a waxing square to Venus in Libra. So there's really a lot of work that the soul is making with relationships and really having a maturation process and new directions with relationships. New relationship. I would work with the outer planets first, doing the transits. I might highlight a little bit on the inner planets, but I wouldn't say too much about them because, again, They move so fast, they're accurate for a day or two. And the first time you have a client and you've got an hour, 90 minutes with them, you got to focus on the big points rather than getting lost in some of the details. Um, I might, again, share a little bit of this because of this big conglomerate here, Pisces planets opposing the Virgo. I might say some things on that. What I do want to point out is transiting nodes moving backwards through the zodiac. At least the forecasting programs do the transiting nodes correctly. And as you can see here, that south node's moved beyond Uranus from mid-January, but it's still conjunct. And you can see the north nodes over here on Venus. Venus is the ruler of the north node. There's a lot of energy from this soul and moving forward with relationships. So we could be asking, again, details. How long have you been in a relationship? What's the history with this person? Etc., etc. Now, here's the secondary progressions for this same Aries, zero Aries chart. And as you can see with secondary progressions, a degree for a year, we have a lot of stuff going on. But I, first of all, just want to point out, here's the natal node. All right. Progressions with the node would be reversing. And here's the node at about 10 degrees. Oh, it did do progressions right. 10 degrees Scorpio? Yes. Okay. Progressions are correct here. It's just the solar arcs that we're going to have to worry about. I'll correct my notes for you in my previous slide for you. Yes, that one is correct. Okay, and so thank you. That's a relief. As you can see here, you can look at the progressed sun. It's just went over natal Neptune. It's here. Progressed Mercury is getting closer and closer. You can see that these planets are having an effect on relationships, and perhaps this person is getting ready for some relationship commitment with this new person. I would start to be looking at a lot of the aspects that are going on, and I didn't draw the grid up for this. I'm showing you the visual rather than the grid. I'll actually work with the grid in looking at this stuff so that I can have, again, a lot of the math done for me and I won't have to focus on it so much. One of the things that we can look at here, as you can see natally, we didn't speak about this yet, we have natal Saturn in Sag, having a first quarter square to Pluto, a very, very tight square to the Sun, and Mars having a last quarter square to Saturn. Progressed Saturn's moving beyond that, okay, but it's getting closer and closer. Progressed Saturn's getting closer and closer to this first quarter square with Mars. So there could be some questions around work, around his procrastination and taking actions with whatever he feels is culminating at this point in his life. Again, remember that transiting Saturn is right here. You can drop the quad wheel if you want to in regards to all of this. And so I'm not spending a whole lot of time in interpretation. I just want to show you that this works. Now, here's what I was saying earlier. It's the directions, the solar arc directions, okay? Look at here. Here's natal moon at 12 degrees Scorpio. If it would reverse a degree for a year, it's going to be back here somewhere. And look where they've got it. Do not trust solar arc nodes of the moon because they're moving them counterclockwise. And they need to move them in a clockwise direction, and you can't tell me that the software programs can't do this. They can easily program this solar arc for the nodes to go retrograde. Sooner or later, one of them is going to pay attention to me. So I would just kind of very quickly, if you want to do this in a fast way, you're looking at the north node being 12 Scorpio natally, and here it is over here at 9 Capricorn. There's the 57 degrees. So you could just go 57 degrees the other direction. Go 60, all right? And 60 degrees is going to take you to 12 Virgo, okay? You're just reversing 60 degrees. You're going from 12 Scorpio to 12 Libra to 12 Virgo, and then back it off 57, which means you would go to 15 Virgo. The North Node is right here on natal Mars. This is also going to impact on emotional levels, how well he is being able to rebirth actions, rebirth desires in his soul. It even has a flavor of how well North Node Virgo is he really loving himself and feeling at peace with moving forward, taking actions however he wants to. Now, as you can see, the solar arcs move a lot. With progressions, the inner planets move faster, outer planets move slower. With solar arcs, it's the opposite. With solar arcs, the inner planets slow down. They're a degree for a year. And the outer planets move faster. Okay? And of course, if you have progressions and the inner planets go retrograde or direct by progressions, then that is an exception to the rule there. And so again, you can see that there's quite a bit that's going on here in regards to this. You have the moon making a waxing trine, solar arc moon making a waxing trine. I don't know that I would trust this so much. I could play with it. Again, you don't have to throw the moon out completely, but I would be a little leery with it, but I'd still maybe play with it a little bit. I will sometimes. Now, again, I said this earlier, but I just want to bring it forth for you one more time. When you're working with chart rectification, one of the beautiful things about the fact that we use Pluto as being representative of the soul is that you can do that observe correlate, which is really just questions and answers, to work to discern a natal Pluto house. And if you narrow that Pluto down to a house, then you're going to have more or less a 2-hour window of time that you're going to work with. And so the second thing that you would then go to work with is a rising sign, the moon if it changes signs, and etc. from there. Leroy, we're getting a UPS delivery, so you can ignore the doorbell ringing if it rings, and I apologize to students. My teaching class is right outside the front door. What you've got to do, though, is you've got to be able to distinguish Pluto generations from a natal Pluto house. Now, this is not something that's necessarily the easiest thing to do, and it's not enough subject matter to really look at this within our basic 2-hour class here. It's a lot more material. I'll try and cover it as best as I can as we go through the next 12 classes. And you also would look at some of these basic questions. They're going to really work around where their biggest security issues are. Because again, remember, wherever that natal Pluto house is, it's where any soul is going to gravitate to early on in a lifetime for security reasons. And so you can ask them childhood questions. But just like I had asked, I can't remember what the question was earlier. Oh, Chiron, just reflect on me over your whole lifetime and where's some of your biggest wounding. You can just ask them, reflect on me or with me from childhood to parents and environment, etc., etc. Where are some of your biggest fears? Because the fears are going to be the security issues. And those are that is the area of where you're going to be asking those questions in order to start working with guessing where the Pluto house is. And there's various rectification methods out there, and I've touched in with some of them. I I don't. I guess I should just disclose that I have a little bit of prejudice here. To me, working to discern that Pluto house is probably by far one of the more accurate ways, or one of the ways I'm most interested in looking at it. All right, questions again with anybody, and if you do, you're always welcome to just ask us. I'm going to switch subject. I'm going to switch to the second variable here that we're having with this class. And this is when somebody comes to you and they've got their birth date and place, and they've got a window of time for you. Now, generally, if somebody says AM or PM to me and they're giving me a 12-hour window, that's too much time. And you can't do that in a short consultation with a client. I'll just go, I mean, if they have a birth minute, like I've got a long-term client here, and she had the birth minute on the birth certificate, but there was no AM or PM. We ran the chart both ways, and it was so crystal clear on what the birth time is that we didn't need to go any further. We used, and I don't remember which one it was, but there was a big difference between whether she had an Aries rising or a Libra rising. And those rising signs are pretty distinctive. And she was so the Libra rising. This woman just instinctually oozes Libra, and she didn't have a lot of Libra in the chart. It was more the ascendant. She was Pluto Leo generation, and so that Libra ascendant softened up some of that Leo energy that she runs as a generational level. She's very creative, but there's a softness and a gentleness there. So if they've got a minute, but they don't know whether it's AM or PM, you can run the chart both ways, and you can pretty much discern from there. But otherwise, if they're just saying, I was born in the morning and, 6 to 8 hours, those are too big of windows for me to work with, I go to 0° Aries. I start working with them when they get it, say they've got it down to 15 minutes. Of course, I'll work with them. That becomes pretty easy. Then I just go focus on any planets that change houses, whatever's distinct in the chart. If I'll work with that window up to say 2-3 hours. I feel comfortable with that. I can kind of then just start to vary the ascendant if it changes signs, moon as it changes aspects, Pluto as it changes any houses. But in this example that I'm going to show you, this is another client coming this week, and her mother remembers a 90-minute window. The time was not on the birth certificate. And so what I have a tendency to do is just cast multiple charts, and I use 15-minute integrals for timing. And in my case, I use Porphyry houses. This is her first astrological reading. And so then I'll look for variables with the Pluto house first thing off the bat to see if that Pluto house changes from one house to the next. I'll look to see if the ascendant or rising sign changes. I'll look to see if the moon changes in any way, any specifics, and I'll look to see if there's any other planets that change houses. And then in my environmental conditionings with them, I'll say, have you had any major life events? Were you in a serious car accident? Are your parents deceased? And if so, when, can give me a date of death. And then I'll be sitting there with my little ephemeris, or you can sit there if you're more comfortable running it with your computer, and you can run forecasting to see if some of the outer planets, those slower moving outer planets, and in this case I have a tendency to use Saturn through Pluto, were they changing houses? Were they, making major aspects? The major aspects won't give you timing so much. The timing really has to come with outer planets changing houses, okay? Because let me use you an example. You've got a window of time, and transiting Uranus is going from the first house to the second house. And they tell you, well, such and such a time period, I remember it was 1997, and I lost my job overnight. And you can look back and you can see transiting Uranus was in such and such a sign, and it moved from the first house to the second house. Even by retrograde, it started doing that. That can help you start pinpointing time. You can run natal chart, and you can vary the time on the natal chart, and then you can see when was the first time, or when was Uranus going direct or retrograde between the first and second, closest to the date they got the pink slip. That's, one of those major life events that helps you pinpoint time when you've got it. I mean, astrologers use this all the time when they're just trying to assess the birth time within a couple of minutes. They know they have a birth moment, but they're trying to decide, did somebody play loose with the accurate exact time in the hospitals? I was born in a military hospital. They were pretty accurate down to the minute, and military births are pretty accurate in that way. You could use progressions in solar arc planets over the 4 angles. You can use them changing intermediary angles as well, secondary houses, you can do that. But many times, if you have progressed or solar arc planets doing major stuff, self, home, relationships, career. Oops, I got to put a 10th house in there. That can be areas where you can really then start to work with narrowing that time down. Obviously, we're not doing beginning astrology here, but I hope that I'm being perhaps clear enough for all of you, that it's just giving you some foundations here of working with it. And of course, as you're looking at these major life events and as you're doing that Q&A with them, you always want to be working with rectifying charts. Now, I'll show you how it works in both Solar Fire and WindStar here at the end of this next hour as we're going through it. But here's what I want to show you now with this next chart. And I think this is where it's going to work pretty good as a webinar, using this as a variable. First of all, let me take another drink and see if I have questions. All right, now, this client who is coming the end of this week, her mother has told her that she can best recollect that it was somewhere between 12:30 and 2 p.m. in the afternoon. We're working with a chart for September 29th, 1961. Oh, Belfouche, South Dakota. I forgot to put that in there. She's born in the same place as Leroy, and she had a conversation with Leroy, and there's this number of years that the Belfouche Hospital, little hospital in western South Dakota, so this is Belfouche, South Dakota, they didn't record the birth times. Leroy used a psychic before he ever met me and getting his birth time, and we've been using that chart for, almost 20 years now. Timing seems to be fairly accurate. So what I do in this case is I start in the first time zone she gave me, which is 12:30. As you can see, I've got an 8th house Pluto here. The planets go clockwise as the Earth revolves around its axis. The rising sign every 4 minutes moves forward a degree. You can remember that, okay? When you're looking at planets really close to ascendant, descendant, midheaven, nadir, those 4 angles change 1 degree every 4 minutes. And so if one's really, really close, you can start to question the time of whether that planet's on one side of the house or another side of the house. Because again, one more time, the four angles, more or less, it can vary, but they more or less change 1 degree every 4 minutes. And so we know we're dealing with an eighth house Pluto here. Starting out, the question is does it get to the seventh house before 2 p.m. in the afternoon? We know that we're dealing with the Sag rising at 22, so it's a good chance that we're gonna have it move from Sag to Capricorn before that window of time is over. And there's a lot of difference between a Sagittarian and a Capricorn rising. And I've met this woman. I briefly met her for a couple of times in social events. That's how she's coming to me as a client. So I've got a visual on her. I already suspect a Sag rising, just the way she communicates and talks, over a Capricorn rising. And so I've got that little intuitive hit in my mind, but I'm not going to take it as gospel, and I'm going to look as we go through it. Not only that, we have the nodal axis here in the second and the eighth. And so Pluto astrologers, we're really going to work with the soul and its ego here. And in addition to that, the rising sign. And so what I'm going to do here is just briefly go through this same chart every 15 minutes. And I want you to look at the visual of what changes. And so this is 12:30. Here we are at 12:45. Neptune moves from the 11th to 10th house. Still have Sag rising, still have Libra on the ascendant, Capricorn still intercepted first. Here is 1 p.m. Nothing changes so much there, but we've got ourselves to a 29-degree rising. Look what happens when we go to 1:15. Mars moves over to the ninth house from the 10th. Mercury's closer to the midheaven. We got a 2 degrees Cap rising. Pluto and the nodes staying the same. Sun staying the same. Moon still the same. 1:30. Mercury moved over. Otherwise, everything's pretty much the same. 1:45. Moon moves from the 6th to the 5th. Otherwise, everything's the same. 2 o'clock. Neptune joins Mercury and Mars in the ninth house. So we've got a 90-degree minute of time here. Pluto stayed in the eighth house all the way through. The nodes stayed in the south node 2nd, north node 8th, all the way through. Saturn, Jupiter stayed in the 1st. Sun stayed in the 9th. As a matter of fact, all the 8th house planets stayed in the 8th house. So what changed? And during this 90-minute window? Well, we know that the moon is 6th down to 5th, but moon's in the 6th house for like the first hour and 15 minutes out of the hour 30 minutes. So it's a good possibility that that moon's going to be in the 6th. We had the Capricorn rising come through at 1:15, so about halfway between that 90 minutes. First half Sag, second half Capricorn. That starts to be a real key spot for me, is being able to discern this ascendant. Not only that, the descendant. There's a lot of difference between a Gemini descendant and a Cancer descendant. So you can just start to ask those questions. If it's Gemini, if it's Sag Gemini on the ascendant descendant, we're going to have somebody who's a lot more talkative. They're going to be a lot more adaptable and flexible with relationships, even with these interceptions. Yes, the first 45 minutes, these planets are intercepted. a Sag rising dresses differently than a Capricorn rising. That's another method of rectification, is just how does somebody instinctually dress? I'm a Capricorn rising. I have a tendency to dress as my plain Jane farm girl background, especially when I'm at home. Now I got a lot of Scorpio. I can go out there and put my belly dance clothes on with the best of them. They're a little tighter these days, but I can still do my Scorpio dress up. Sun in Scorpio, eighth house, Pluto, all that kind of stuff. But you can look at that ascendant. Again, one of the things I found, Sag ascendants, they are very talkative. And that's the reason why I'm kind of going this way with this woman, because I've interacted with her twice now, and there's no shyness or reservations about the communications. You start getting into the early degrees Capricorn, and this is somebody who's going to be a lot more contained, especially with an eighth house Pluto. And they're going to have some trust issues that they're going to work through and feel safe with people before they're opening up to them. This is not how this person is presenting herself. The other factor that really starts to change is the fact that if we go all the way back to the beginning, we have Neptune in the 11th and Mars Mercury in the 10th, and look at how they change. All in the 10th, all in the 10th, okay? And Mars moves over, and then Mercury, as you follow it through, so does Neptune. So the fact that these are small houses here, okay? The fact that Neptune goes from the 11th to the 10th to the 9th, this could be an area where I could really start to question her as well on some of her deepest beliefs and some of her deepest disappointments and disillusionments. And I hear Leroy typing. You got a question or comment?
Well, our resident psychic on the board says she's getting very strongly that this soul here is a 10th house Mars. And
Ah,
so Linda Ford's right on it. And that'll be interesting
all
for you to
right.
give some feedback as you do interact with this client. It'd be interesting to kind of have a follow up.
Well, I'm making a note here, okay? And so stay tuned for the segment one Facebook. That's where I'll work with it because I won't have time in actual classes, but I'll give you some feedback for that. And if we are working with, you know, this, and you notice this one too, I agree, because again, Mars in the 9th, it's Capricorn rising. Mars in the 10th, it's the 29 degree Sag. And so I'll let you know. But as you can see, with those three planets up there in the 10th house, those are the ones that are changing houses other than the moon at the tail end. You can see in this window, as I've drawn up these charts, where I'm going to be asking questions. The rising sign, the three planets on the 10th house, and especially Neptune going from 11th to 9th, and working with that, okay? And then possibly that moon, although I do think that probably that moon is going to be in that 6th house because it barely changes over that 90 minutes. Now, this example is not showing you an example of Pluto changing houses. As you've become evolutionary astrologers and work with this, you start to become aware of the fact that Pluto in each of the 12 houses is much different. Pluto in the 7th house is more like a Libra soul. Pluto in the 8th house is more like a Scorpio soul. Pluto Libras and Pluto Scorpios approach relationships two different directions. And so while they're similar, there's a difference. And so if you do have a 1 to 3 hour window of time and you have Pluto or the nodes change houses, obviously that would be the area you would start to ask questions. So as you can see, I have a tendency to just draw up the different charts and look at them visually and just grasp what changes within that window of time. And that's what helps me then go into my session with the client and really focus on narrowing down that time. Then you can bring in all of the forecasting as well. You can bring in transits, progressions, and solar arcs, and work with them, just like I showed you previous from that. Okay. Now the other thing that I will show you is this is all I've done for the charts. I'm just trying to, again, show you how to do the math over the interpretation. Okay. We could be here forever with interpretation. But what I'd like to do now is take you out, and just in case any of you are not aware of this, show you in Solar Fire. Oops, okay. I sure did. In Solar Fire, when you click, when you bring the chart up to, when you do the view, okay, viewing of the chart, which again is just double clicking on the chart or clicking on the chart, they have a button called Rectify, okay? And so what you can do here is you can start to play with these charts and doing them differently, okay? So we could move it forward 5 minutes, apply. All right, this is how you would do it. And especially once you start narrowing, if you start narrowing that window down to the half hour, the 15 minutes, then you start, you think that you've got Mars in the 10th, and you think that you've got Neptune in the 10th, you start to see where it changes. Where did Neptune go into the 10th house? So I'm doing it by minute here to show you this. (12:31). From 12:30 to 12:31, you can see 11th house 946, Neptune 948. You can see it didn't take long. Now that's doing it by the minute. You can set it up to do 10-minute interviews as well, okay, with Solar Fire, okay. And so 12, you see how we just went from 12:30 to 12:40. Again, just showing you where to do this in Solar Fire. Here's 12:40. Oops. Here's 12:50. Here's 1. So you can see how Solar Fire will allow you to do it 1 second, 1 second, 10 seconds, 1 minute, 10 minutes, and an hour. Okay, and how you're looking at that. Now, I don't, well, let me go back to this. I don't know, angled step interview, I don't know what that is. That's a little more complicated. I'm sure it's working with ascendant, descendant, midheaven, nadir, but I can't tell you what that is. I don't know what that is.
And of course,
So that's how you do that in Solar Fire.
those are intervals, right?
Go ahead.
Intervals, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Time step interval is what we're working with here. And so this is how you can do the visual, especially if you've got a phone client. You can do it phone or in person, but it becomes easy to do that. I have a tendency to start with the charts. I'm just a visual orientated person, and I have them laid out so I can go back. I'll actually with her have 5, 6 charts laid out and go back and forth. And once I narrow it, then I'll go to the computer. Okay, so that's how you do it in Solar Fire. For those of you who might have WinStar, okay, I might have to move this over just a little bit. Is it going to let me do it? No. There. Let's move this over. When you're working on it in WinStar, you go to the extras. Oh, no, I'm going to have to find it this way. WinStar changes the menus this way, okay? And so
I have to get to, if you're looking at the top here with me, extra. Should have went the other direction. Extra menu, you have rectification. Now, the thing that I don't like about this with WinStar is I cannot get this off of this little wheel in front that they so nicely provide you with. But with what you can do with WinStar is they allow you to take hour, minute, and second and just, for instance, you see with this one, 12:30 p.m., okay, I can move it, I can switch to minutes, the yellow highlights, and I can go, it's actually doing it. So I have to go the opposite of look at the descendant to get my ascendant. If I do redraw, oh, I've got the redraw set. It doesn't redraw this chart until I save, all right? But I've got redraw highlighted. So as I move along, it is just actually moving it minute by minute. Typically, I don't work with the seconds. And an hour, sometimes I'll do that, but that's too much time for me. This is why I will draw up those 15-minute interval charts. And then as I've narrowed it down within 15 minutes, half hour, then I will go to use the rectifications with the charts. But we have this one up to 12:41 p.m. and replace it. No. And if so, if I choose that, oh, it didn't take it. It didn't apply. I can replace it. It doesn't give me an extra chart. So that's how you do that in WinStar. Okay. Question? Another question, Leroy?
Yeah, clarification on the board. Asking, we're going to have to backtrack just a little bit here. What information do you get from Solar Arc versus the progression as you were showing us about 15-20 minutes ago?
Okay. I can easily go back to that for you. Let me go back to the slides. There they were. Okay, so here's the transits, okay? All right. And here's the progressions. And here is the solar arcs. Now, if you wanted to, you could do a quad wheel. Let me do the quad wheel for you because we've got enough time. I didn't done the quad wheel because I wanted it to be, all right, and so view. I had wanted it to be, okay, and what I want is transits. I'm going to use transits. And then I like to use progressions and direct. And I know you can program this, I just haven't done it. Okay, and so here you go. Here's all of them for the same thing we were looking at in our slideshow. Here's that natal chart at 0 degrees Aries with the 6th house Pluto. And here's transits, here's progressions, here's solar arcs. Okay, now I'm not quite clear on what the question was, but let me say this. Regardless of the different forecasting methods, transits, progressions, solar arcs, 3 different mathematical methods, regardless of the math, the interpretation's the same. The archetype of transiting Pluto and progressed Pluto and solar arc Pluto. This is still going to be the evolution of the soul relative to its natal position. Transiting Pluto's here. Progressed Pluto's still in the 6th house. It's barely moved. Solar arc Pluto's moved to 26 Libra. All 3 interpretations of forecasting Pluto will describe how the evolution of the soul is taking place today relative to natally.
And just as a clarification, that Pluto point, the natal Pluto point, will be the stationary point, and the solar arcs and progressions are relative to that, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Natal Pluto, as it's getting squished in here, is 0 degrees Virgo. All right. Transiting Pluto, you start with natal Pluto. Transiting Pluto has obviously moved past the waxing trine of 120, and it's now getting to be 135. Transiting Pluto is getting ready to make the sesquisquadrate to the natal Pluto. That's going to be an interesting aspect where the soul is going to have to shift from first quarter phase to gibbous phase. All right, and as that Pluto gets to be 15, 16 Capricorn and goes into gibbous phase to natal, there's going to be that Virgo-like effect that's going to come back upon this soul. It could have a very strong impact at 0 degrees here. And Capricorn, it could have something to do with career. I'm not looking at the fact that it's the 10th house, but you can read it that way. I'm just reading the sign in the natural house. There could be something that will come up with career over the next couple of days, or excuse me, years for this soul that they are going to have to address.
Okay, now keep that thought in mind, then, Kim. I think what Wanda's question, as I'm following her thread now on the board, is her last statement was, why use solar arc? What's the difference between solar arc and progression? So we might have to just back up just a little bit and explain the relevancy of these two forecasting tools.
Okay. Basically, and from a perspective of interpretation, there's no difference. Progressed Pluto and solar arc Pluto is still the evolution of Pluto in the soul. The difference is the math. And in progressions, in the secondary progressions down here, this is the day for a year. You look in the ephemeris, that little printout, and for every year of someone's life, you count a day in the ephemeris. And so slower moving planets barely move. Moon moves 13 to 15 degrees a year. Each year, because it moves 13 to 15 degrees a day for a year. Solar arcs are a degree for a year. Solar, sun, arc movement. The sun moves a degree a day, so we move every planet a degree for each year of life. So we have two different mathematical forecasting methods, solar arcs and progressions. Solar arcs is the middle outer wheel. Progressions are the middle outer wheel. Solar arcs the outermost wheel. As you're looking at this, different mathematical methods for forecasting the planets. And yet interpretation of an archetype is the same. Now, in your more traditional astrology, there are astrologers out there, and I'm not going to remember it correctly. They're going to say progressions are inner events, solar arcs are outer events, or vice versa. And in observing, correlating, I see inner events and outer events with both progressions and solar arcs. And I use all three. I've used all three major forecasting methods: transits, solar arcs, progressions, and solar arcs. I've used them forever. Very few astrologers use solar arcs, and because it speeds up those outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, all the way out to Pluto, there's a lot of stuff that goes on with the solar arcs when you draw up their hit list. And I find those to be relevant time and time and time again when I do forecasting with clients. And so if you're working with forecasting with clients, I recommend you use all three. And I have a tendency to draw up the hit list. I went over this, which class did I look at this at recently? We looked at this last year. Forecasting. I did a class last year, segment 1 on forecasting. I'll refer you to that class. Go check it out. It'll be in the segment 1 students area, and you can go review in more detail there. I think Leroy was looking that up for me. Now, I've covered the material. My gosh, I've gotten through a class before 2 hours. I I've been timing, I haven't even tried, and boom, 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 I'm like 2 hours on my classes. So this one, we've gotten through the material a little bit faster. Are there any other questions and anything to do with missing birth data, chart rectification?
No, nice job, Kim. It can be a little confusing for some of the newer students. I'm noticing that, and of course that's natural because you're putting a lot of more information in a quad wheel than obviously with a
This is,
transit
yeah,
hit list.
this is not beginner's material. Yes, thank you, Leroy. I will just say to you, this is not beginner's material. I will put that right out there. But again, you're going to have this to go back to and go back and refer to it. And because as I switch from audio classes to video classes, I've kind of tried to go back to the beginning, and I just was looking for a standalone class, and the subject popped into my head, and so I went with it. I will say that if you're more of a beginner, I had 10 years of audio classes that you can go back and listen to if you'd like to. I would also say that you go back and review the video classes from 2014 because it was early 2014 where I started with webinars, and I kind of started over with material. Now, as we work through the next 12 classes and work through natal Pluto in the next 12 archetypes, it'll go back to beginning material, balancing beginning, intermediate material. We'll really focus on those archetypes, but we will look at one, possibly two charts in each class. And having said that, what I would also like to then share with everybody is that, oops, I gotta go through, let me go back out here and get to, instead of going through all of those, here is the outline as we start in March. I have volunteers for Pluto in the first, third, fourth. I need a volunteer for the second. Would feel more comfortable if I had that volunteer soon because class is coming up soon. And then, of course, as we move through the year, I've got the rest of the houses to look for volunteers with. And so preference is given to new students over students who have had their charts volunteered for classes before. And I do have to give preference to students' charts versus a family member's chart. If I don't have somebody volunteer for Pluto in the second house, I'll put out a last minute call. Hey, do you have a family member who has Pluto in the second, so that I've got some houses, some charts to work with. But again, point is, as we now move through the rest of the classes, we'll work more with the basics of Pluto in the first through the 12th houses, following the Pluto Volume 1 book of Jeffrey Green's. Any other questions that I have in case you're interested? I do have 3 public webinars listed moving into March and April. We're going to look at the last of the Uranus waxing squares to Pluto and what to expect the rest of this decade. And we'll work with Saturn's retrograde and Pluto's retrograde that are coming up here in the near future. All right, last call. Questions on any subject, any area? All right then, so I thank you all very, very much for showing up today and interacting. And as you go through these classes, let me say one more thing and get this on the tape as well for everybody, please. As more and more people are becoming comfortable with webinar classes,
if you have a PC or a laptop, and I think tablets, we encourage everybody to get headsets or earbuds that can hook in. A headset with a USB connection is best, or earbuds that are connect in like a phone connection. And as people get more comfortable with that, then it's easy for us to open the lines up and you can ask your questions live and interact live. We by all means welcome that. We're just finding that we're working with people getting used to attending classes this way. I absolutely love it. I absolutely loved being able to go to Florida and teach live. I hadn't done it for a few years. Apparently, I was a little animated. That's part of my that's the sad part of my personality. But I also love the fact of being able to live where I live and reach you with classes like this as well. I mean, I love the whole works.
Yeah,
So thank you.
the evolution of evolutionary astrology is the next level. Will be a lot more interaction with our students with that audio, but you've got to do your part and get mic'd up, so to speak, with earbuds or a USB headset, and then we'll know when the right time is to move forward with a lot more interaction.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great month, and if